Whether you've just started teaching or spent decades in the classroom, you know there's always more to learn. But where do you start? Well, here at Hillsdale College, we have the answer for you. Tried and True, a primer on sound pedagogy by Hillsdale College professor Daniel Copeland. In this little book, you'll read lessons from more than 25 years of Dr. Copeland's classroom experience. It's all distilled into 14 easy-to-read chapters on lesson planning, assignments, and classroom management, and it will help you improve your skills and inspire you as a teacher, one of our most important professions. Whether you've been in front of the classroom for years, or this is your first year, when you read Tried and True, you'll find something to help you keep improving every single day. You don't need to go at it alone. Let Dr. Copeland's real-world experience encourage you and inspire you. You can get your copy today at hillsdale.edu/true. That's hillsdale.edu/TRUE. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Issac Johnson. He is Dean of Student Life at Cincinnati Classical Academy in Cincinnati, and also part of the Latin faculty there. Issac, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Scott.
We've talked with you previously on the show, and now get a chance to check back in after you've spent a little time at Cincinnati Classical Academy. Way back when, so long ago now, you spent a year here at the Hillsdale College K-12 Education Office School Leadership Fellowship Program before joining the faculty there at Cincinnati Classical Academy and the leadership team there. What led you to the School Leadership Fellowship Program here at the K-12 office?
Well, Scott, like many English majors there at Hillsdale as an undergraduate, I was drawn to the ideal first of becoming, that bow tie and elbow patch wearing, pipe smoking, fountain pen writing professor who, reeked of both Earl Grey tea and mahogany. But it became deeply ironic that several of my advisors, several of my mentors, all of whom were English professors there at the school, they steered me in this different direction towards K-12 leadership, in fact. And I remember one of them saying at a dinner that we, meaning the faculty and academia, are only the benefactors of what has come before them. And the real rescuing of souls, the true battlefield, is at the beginning of a student's formation all the way down to kindergarten. And that stuck with me as I continued junior, senior year of college. And I found more and more as I learned about the growing classical education movement in America, and especially with Hillsdale's K-12 education office, that we always need more classical school teachers, of course, but the leaders of the schools are very few and far between. And the Hillsdale Network is committed to nothing short of excellence in particular, which is why, it turns away so many leadership applicants. So then the question is, how did I, as this young buck, wind up where I did in this fellowship program? Well, helping with the online courses program at Hillsdale for several years, leading their operations. And I began searching for where I might fit, within several of these classical networks across the US. And I applied to a couple. And during the week that I was deciding on offers, I had the opportunity to meet with Dr. O'Toole there in the K-12 education office. And she laid this pilot program in my lap as a proposition. And we both agreed that I would be a fool not to leap for it and to try it out and to help them determine what would be best in terms of this formation for future administrators, future school leaders. And so I never regretted that chance to, again, pilot this program, which now has seen so much success, especially in its second year and following.
How would you say that your expectations for what the program would entail and how it would help you compared to what you actually experienced going through the School Leadership Fellowship program?
Yes, well, I would say anyone experiencing and then immersed in the admin responsibilities at a charter school, let alone a classical charter school, you can never quite understand or foresee what will happen or what will be expected of you. But this fellowship program gave me the opportunity to use an analogy here, stand out on a terrace and see multiple vistas or aspects of the role and also its relation to the school within the network. So, for instance, I was housed at a specific school, and that was Hillsdale Academy, which is a private Christian school. But that gave me good teaching experience. It gave me that opportunity to meet with headmaster weekly, to have those admin responsibilities. But not only that, but then also to travel with the K-12 support team to these different schools in the network, both charter and private. So we'd be traveling one week to Atlanta and Florida, the next to Indiana and Ohio, which is where I first encountered Cincinnati Classical in particular. So that gave me an experience of the variety of these schools, right? It's not just one size fits all, even within the classical tradition. But then finally, being able to participate directly with the training there on Hillsdale's campus, both for the board development with what right governments ought to look like, with especially the founding of a new school, and then also for headmasters, for deans, faculty, student life, the curriculum, really just sinking your teeth into every aspect of what makes an excellent school in the network. So really, with those three vistas, I was able to experience more than I could have ever imagined in preparing me for this next year.
At Cincinnati Classical, both in leadership and on the Latin faculty, so that teaching along with administrative responsibilities can be challenging to balance. Have you found there are advantages, though, to being both inside a classroom and serving in a leadership role at your school?
If the activity of learning is what you might call the still small point around which everything turns in a school, no matter if it's classical, conventional, public, then those who lead it must not only be reminded daily of what excellent teaching consists of, but also really be immersed in it, participating in it, and emulating it for others. When I enter the classroom each day to teach or to observe others, it's not an escape from admin duties. Some might think that might be the case, but rather it's a return to the source. It's practicing and improving upon the first principles of sound pedagogy in real time. And it truly is a most rejuvenating experience. And for me, that's just one period each day, but boy, it's lights out whenever I have that opportunity to be in there with those seventh grade students. And, we found that as this particular school, Cincinnati Classical, it's in its second year, it continues to grow. We are committed as an admin team in the classroom and to remain there. You see this as a major indicator of excellence in many of the luminary schools in Hillsdale's network. I can think of what I've seen at Atlanta Classical, Seven Oaks in Indiana, Hillsdale Academy, to name only a few. I greatly enjoyed whenever I had the opportunity to be in Headmaster Mike Roberts' history classes in the high school there at Hillsdale Academy. And I think none of this precludes, though, how difficult I've found it, and many others have found it to be, to balance teaching with those administrative duties and responsibilities. I would consider my lesson planning almost always occurs after the rest of my family is asleep at night. It's before they wake up in the morning, perhaps before most faculty and staff arrive to the school. But I would say this, it is the most rewarding when that hard work pays off in the classroom, which you could say about any teacher worth his or her salt. But when that spark of wonder and zeal is lit, perhaps for the first time, that's something you never want to forget about, especially when you're that step removed from the classroom as an administrator.
Talking with Issac Johnson, Dean of Student Life on the Latin faculty at Cincinnati Classical Academy. As Dean of Student Life, you're involved heavily in creating and maintaining culture at Cincinnati Classical. But as you point out, the school is only in its second year. So we think often of culture as being something that is deeply ingrained, that has taken hold over time. How do you make culture, how do you help a culture exist out of very little to begin with.
Well, you could think, Scott, of school culture that it's presented two different ways typically. One is that the culture is the be-all, end-all of an institution that's committed to strong fine arts or athletic program, for example. There's social committees, spirit weeks and dances, and even a thriving, bustling alumni network that you see at many college preparatory schools. But isn't it true that most students, they do opt for a high school based on these criteria? And what we're attempting here, especially at a classical school, is to wed the culture with the curriculum, to wed the culture with the tradition that we're handing down, student by student, grade by grade. Now, the second way that school culture is often perceived is that it's ancillary, or it's merely some filler activity when students aren't in the classroom. You think about that common phrase, we got to keep those students busy into the evening for their own sake, or perhaps for their parents' sake, right? At that time. But separately, though, classical school culture, that's a way of life. As T.S. Eliot would define culture itself, it's this lived out and living, life-giving tradition within a close-knit community. And at Hillsdale Academy or at Cincinnati Classical, culture is integral to the curriculum. It constitutes a whole greater than the sum of its parts. And, before I speak about what it is like to create and sustain a new culture at a founding school, what I witnessed at Hillsdale Academy, which is 30 odd year plus established, is that it's precisely those points of culture that have been handed down year after year. And so you might see in 8th grade celebrating their study of A Christmas Carol in December by dressing up in Victorian style and putting on Fezziwig's ball themselves, or where 90% of the high school, for example, runs together after school as a part of their cross-country team, or where the seniors are drinking tea with misconduct during their final literature seminar discussions. It's a beautiful thing. And all of these instances manifest what Headmaster Roberts reiterates throughout the school year. Culture eats everything else for breakfast. You should ask him what he means by that on air here, Scott. It's very beneficial. But what has been unique in particular about the culture now at Cincinnati Classical is that it's not 30 odd years established. The school was only founded last school year. Mm-hmm. So you can feel that kinetic energy, that spontaneous creativity of the faculty and of the school leaders. As that culture is growing day by day into what it was meant to be, it's becoming more fully its ideal self. It's never that the school becomes more foreign the more we grow in our culture. We step back and we realize, this is what we were searching for. It's almost this nostalgic look at something that, we're shaking hands with a friend that we haven't seen for a long time. An example of this was just this Tuesday. We had our half day before Christmas break. And we had assemblies with the students. And once they were all gathered, we typically have this talent time where, a student will play the piano, for example, or recite a poem. But here we surprised them by having a flash mob of our own faculty with both wind instruments, string performing Deck the Halls. And the students, they just went berserk. It was this beautiful moment of participating as a community in song. And it was really this gift to both the students and to the faculty before entering into this much needed time of rest and family. And so I would say this too about our culture here at Cincinnati Classical in particular, and this is thanks to the vision of our head of school, Mr. Rose, is that every inch of the school, even the building, radiates our culture and mission. You can see this from the timeline of the paintings and the hallways that encircle it. We're blessed with a leased building that is a circle. And so you walk around every single classroom and you see these beautiful works of art. You also see it in the emblematic seal that's on our front foyer with our sentinel eagle. And that's something the students know, please do not step on the seal. They're not quite sure what happens. The kindergartners assume that they'll fall through that seal when they walk across it. But you see as guests come in, they're always saying, please, ma'am, do not cross the seal. And for example, also, right, the names that are given even to the rooms, the outdoor spaces. Our conference room is called the Churchill War Room. Our cafeteria is the Cincinnatus Refectory. Our art building is called the Fra Angelico Center. And even where the students are practicing rugby, for example, on the fields outside, they're called the Elysian Fields, right? It's that space in which they can practice that heroic virtue and skill. So I think the last thing I'll mention about this is that currently at Cincinnati Classical, we're grades K through 7, we're adding a grade per year, and we're in the midst of planning this distinctive upper school culture. And so we're asking ourselves, what would a house system look like? What plays would we perform from the curriculum? What will our full-fledged athletic program consist of? And being a part of such a founding effort has been the most thrilling and harrowing, mind you, experience of my short life so far.
Isaac, we talk about culture and how it exists at Cincinnati Classical. In your role, though, as Dean of Student Life, what does it look like in practice on an everyday basis? What's a Dean of Student Life doing?
I often describe what the role of the Dean of Student Life is in relation to our Dean of Faculty here at the school as well, that the Dean of Faculty is serving primarily the learning itself, right? That still beating heart of what a school is meant to consist of. And the Dean of Student Life coincides with that as leading the efforts of the extension of that learning. And so really fostering and developing that culture. So whether that's with the extracurricular activities, athletic, fine arts, we have a thriving club culture here, including gardening and chess as well. And I would say this too, that I think what is often to the discredit of the Dean of Student Life is that I have to sweat the small stuff each day. So whether that is, being the first on call for, responding to a student issue or, monitoring the uniforms during the day. I can't tell you how many times a middle school fella has come through the doors and I've taught them how to tie a tie properly. And I enjoy that. I often say that it's the spontaneous moments each day are the most enjoyable and most terrifying moments for me. I've always been a habitual routine man growing up. And to find that being on call here, reigning in the tyranny of the urgent and yet still being, responsive to things as they come up during the day is really what is expected in that role. And so you could think of it as the most mundane, but I find it to be the most thrilling as well.
Issac Johnson with us, Dean of Student Life and part of the Latin faculty at Cincinnati Classical Academy. You alluded to this earlier, but there is a great need for leaders at Hillsdale K-12 classical schools. How would you advise teachers, or even those who perhaps aren't teachers yet, who are considering training or applying to join school leadership? How can they prepare well for that adjustment and that move?
This question has been posed so many times, especially in the last 2 years. I can see my peers, my friends, that they're feeling this itch, right, to pursue this path. And I always encourage it, but with what I've observed so far and what I've experienced is that it is hard work. And so any way in which you can prepare for that, to foster those good habits, that prudential experience, a lot of which I didn't have when I began, and I've learned the hard way. One, I would say, is to teach, and to teach again. And when you feel prepared, assume what responsibility might present itself to you at your school along the way. So that could be becoming a grade level team leader, a department head, a dean in the house system. All of these roles, right, are extensions of your teaching in the classroom, but do develop those necessary skills, whether operational, administrative, becoming a liaison more for the students and for the parents in a way that will pay dividends once you are in a leadership role. I would also say establish as much as possible a dialogue, a network with your peers and school leaders elsewhere in other schools. I found that prudence is the ruling art of any kind of leader, and prudence can only be gained through experience, which is really what is so frustrating about this virtue and in acquiring it, is that often we have to learn from our own mistakes, but also I think what's beneficial is that we can learn from others. And so I'm indebted to my friends who have already shared insights along the way, especially at Atlanta Classical in Seven Oaks. I think one of the primary merits of this Hillsdale network is the bonds that are formed between school leaders, between teachers, whether at our summer conference, or when you're able to have the opportunity of visiting these other schools, is that everyone's out there looking for the best in everyone else. And yes, it's competitive, but it's that true and right competition that you find on a sports field, not against an enemy, but rather as comrades focused on the good, right? And what's noble and excellent in this type of education. And isn't that what true friendship is? And I think that's something that's lost often with the faculty, with the staff, is that culture is built upon these ties of friendship. And it's friendship not just for utility's sake or for pleasure, but ultimately for the good in every circumstance. And so my final 2 points to anyone considering, joining, training, applying for school leadership is to continue your liberal education as far as you can reach. So whether that's at this concentrated level of leading a faculty seminar on a great book, pursuing a master's degree in one of the several classical education programs out there now, I can think of Hillsdale in particular. And finally, I would say this: don't be afraid to take a leap and apply for Hillsdale's fellowship program. For me, it made all the difference.
Final question, final point as we close our conversation here. Take a minute or so and sell it. What's fun? What have you enjoyed? What's been great about your time so far as Dean of Student Life at Cincinnati Classical Academy?
I alluded to this earlier in our conversation, Scott, that especially in my position, you never know what's going to turn around the corner next, what you will expect day by day. And so for me, I've had to practice reining in that sense of anxiety, that overwhelming, sense of the tyranny of the urgent, and practicing how to joyfully respond with what good should be done in any circumstance. So to give a couple examples, that might mean after everyone's left and you suddenly hear immense crashes of glass and you just find mason jars strewn across the hallway, and you get out your mop, you get out your vacuum, and you take care of it. I think no headmaster in the network has not had a similar experience with a mop, whether in the hallway, whether in the restroom. And other things, right? The tying of those neckties during morning announcements as students are arriving. It's one of those beautiful traditions that often, dads hand down to sons. And if the son decides to take off that necktie in the car before he arrives at school, I will continue that tradition by tying it and helping him tie it when he gets there. It's the students, right, that are participating in this life of the intellect, in this life of virtue. And, whether you see it in a kindergartner who is just learning how to become civilized, all the way up to, for us, 7th grade, where you can see the portrait of the graduate already within them, that potential for future excellence. And it's a beautiful thing, right? And again, to sell it here is that it's hard work, especially both teaching and with the administrative duties at a classical school. But I tell you what, it is soul enriching. It may not be the noblest work, because I would argue that's what the work is in the classroom with the teacher, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Issac Johnson, Dean of Student Life and member of the Latin faculty at Cincinnati Classical Academy. Issac, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast. I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.